First, we want to say thank you all for joining us today for our webinar Blitz, What's Next in Applying for a Cannabis License, New Mexico. And this is brought to you by Canna Advisors. Our story began in Boulder, Colorado, a hotbed of innovation and free-spirited ambition. We helped the state of Colorado and its cannabis entrepreneurs create and manage groundbreaking legislation. And as the legal cannabis movement expanded, so did we. State by state, country by country, Canna Advisors has helped drive policy and consulted emerging businesses across the world. We forged strong networks of strategic partnerships that have helped to grow the emerging cannabis economy. Few can claim our knowledge or understanding of this industry, and even fewer can claim our influence. All told, we have 100+ years of experience in cannabis on our team and have worked in over more than 30 states, plus Canada, Europe, Guam, and Puerto Rico. Today's presenters, we have Greg Huffaker, the Director of Client Services, and myself, Victoria Trusty. I'm the Senior Account Manager at Client Services. As Director of Client Services, Greg Huffaker oversees the licensing application process, the technical writing team, and overall project management. He's an expert in navigating the complex cannabis regulations and emerging state programs across the country. From his early industry work of maintaining a comprehensive database of ever-changing cannabis laws, his JD from Cardozo School of Law, and his being a Colorado licensed attorney, Greg brings a keen sense of deep knowledge and legislation that impacts clients across every phase of business. Not to mention, he is a New Mexico native.
Thanks, Victoria. Yep, I'm from Santa Fe. I went to St. Mike's High School. So Victoria Trusty oversees client communications, provides support, and contributes excellent attention to detail. She's a trusted point of contact for clients and works closely with them to achieve their goals, educating them on the essentials of opening and operating a cannabis business. Victoria's been in the cannabis industry since 2014 and has worked with clients in over 30 states, 2 countries, and a US territory. She helps develop and manage client ventures such as financial modeling, capital acquisition, investor pitching, cannabis education, and licensing applications. Victoria also works closely with trusted partners and vendors, as well as the other departments at Canna Advisors, to make sure clients have the best possible experience while successfully pursuing their project. Okay, so let's dive into, first, let's talk about where we've been, where we are now, and where we're headed. So cannabis in New Mexico really began in 2007 with enactment of the Lynn and Aaron Compassionate Use Act. This is what set up the medical program that exists today. That medical program, as of the end of 2020, has over 100,000 patients, 46 licenses, though note that some companies have more than one license, so it's kind of actually less companies operating, 16 individual manufacturing licenses, and that all leads to over 10 million grams of cannabis were the 2020 yield in the state. So definitely, thriving medical program. Now, as we probably all know, but just in case we missed it, adult use passed this year in a special session, and the governor signed it soon thereafter. She signed 2 separate bills, House Bill 2 and Senate Bill 2. House Bill 2 is what most of this is about, that we're talking about, but Senate Bill 2 is the one that did the automatic expungement of convictions. So with that passage, it sets off all of these deadlines that I'm about to talk about. The next one is this coming Tuesday, June 29th. For one thing, possession of up to 2 ounces and home grow of 6 mature plants and 6 immature plants is legal starting Tuesday. And there's a limit of 12 plants per household. And that is for 21-year-olds and over, of course. The other thing that is going on is they have put out proposed rules for those cannabis cultivators. And the meeting on Tuesday is going to be to discuss those rules, to have a public hearing about them. They have lots of little details in them and are available on the state's website. And it's stuff like how plant count's gonna work, square footage limits, how the per plant fees are gonna work. and includes stuff like what'll be in the application. If you're interested in that, I think it's on page 10, if my memory serves correctly, maybe it starts on page 9, what some of those details are. So the next thing that's going to happen after next Tuesday is no later than, that's the NLT on this slide, September 1st has several triggers. The first is that the Cannabis Regulatory Advisory Committee has to be created. Now, the deadline is already passed for getting applications in to be on that committee, and all the names are publicly available on the website. And they put those in by May 3rd, and they say that they're going to be out soon. So we'll probably be seeing that name this summer, well before that deadline of September 1st. The next thing that is very exciting is that the Cannabis Control Division is going to begin accepting processing license applications for cannabis producers, cannabis producer micro businesses, and the medical cannabis producers who would like to go over to doing adult use production. So we'll see applications come out no later than September 1st for all those type of growers. Then we're going to have that application period. They're going to grade them, all that good stuff. The next thing is going to be that no later than January 1st of 2022. This is a big day. The first thing is all the regulations have to be out by then. So they're working on the proposed ones now, as I said, for producer, but they got lots of other regulations to make, to propose, to get feedback. Got to get them all out by the beginning of next year. They're also going to have to, no later than that date, issue licenses for the medical cannabis participants who want to transfer over. They're also going to have to begin the licensing for the training and education programs. I'm going to talk about that more in a minute. Just know that, that licensing period isn't going to begin in September or no later than September, but has a no later than January. They have to issue the cannabis server permits by that date though. And then they have a catch-all that they have to begin accepting applications for every license type by then. So producers in September, everybody else by January 1st. Then the big day, April 1st, 2022 is when retail sales must begin no later than, which means that next 4/20, you will be able to celebrate the holiday by going into an adult use dispensary in New Mexico and purchasing product. Victoria, would you like to tell us about the mini licenses available in New Mexico?
Of course. So New Mexico actually is going to have a plethora of license types available for this adult use market. Most of them are listed here below, and I'm going to just briefly read through them, and then Greg and I will be giving a little inside tips and little notes about some of these license types, just to give a little insider information about some of them. So the license type they'll be offering are going to be cannabis testing labs, cannabis research labs, couriers, manufacturers, producers, which is going to be that cultivation type license we'll get into in a minute, producer micro business, retailer, which is going to be those dispensary type licenses, consumption areas, and then also vertically integrated establishments and integrated micro businesses. Greg, do you want to tell us a little bit more about the producer licenses and exactly what that means?
Sure do. So a producer here in New Mexico is what we would call a cultivation. And you are going to start out at a level 1. And a level 1 allows you to have 201 to 2,500 mature cannabis plants. Mature cannabis plant is basically one that's not an immature cannabis plant. An immature cannabis plant is one that's like not showing any buds, flowers yet. And then at the time of license renewal, which is currently set to July for medical producers, you may apply for an increase in the number of plants. And these do have to be in 500 plant increments. And note that even if you go all the way up to 4,500, once you're there, you can't reapply for another 500. You're going to be capped there at that 4,500 limit. And we're going to talk about the fees associated with this in a minute. So just put a pin in your mind that there's some special details around that. Now, I also want to talk about these producer micro business. They are going to be capped at a 200 plant maximum. However, the fees are not going to apply on the per plant basis to these micro businesses. So 2 different license types that are actually existing here, that producer micro business, and then the larger cultivation with the 3 different tiers. So really helpful to try to keep separate in your mind what those are and what your goals are for this business as you're reviewing the rules. Now let's talk about these fun consumption area licenses. So there will be in New Mexico cannabis consumption lounges. Think of a bar, but instead of alcohol, it's cannabis. You will need to be 21 or older to attend. And municipalities will be able to set a cap on the total number. However, they can't completely restrict any type of cannabis activity. Now, if you are somebody interested in one of these licenses as the business owner of the consumption area, all of your employees are going to need a cannabis server permit, which is going to be an individual license essentially that they're going to have to apply for. How do they get that? By you paying a cannabis server education provider who will themselves have to be licensed to do that activity to train your employees in order for them to obtain that cannabis server permit. So just good to know that there's sort of this red tape multi-step thing you need to do, making sure all the licenses are lined up correctly. But this is a pretty new license type across the country. It's been tried many places, and it seems like New Mexico has gone about it very intentionally, really setting it up for success. Victoria, why don't you tell us about some of these integrated and vertical licenses?
Sure. So this is something we actually haven't seen in a minute, states giving out vertically integrated licenses. So really what that means is that the license holder for the business is actually going to maintain that supply chain. And what that further means is that the person holding a vertically integrated cannabis establishment license, they are authorized to act as any of the following. So they could be a courier, a manufacturer, a producer, and a retailer. And in layman's terms, that basically means that this person can cultivate the cannabis. They can make their own products from the cannabis that they cultivate. They can sell those products at their dispensary location, and then they can also transport to patients and consumers. So that is what a vertically integrated establishment would be. The next license type I would like to talk about is very similar, but it's going to have those caps that Greg mentioned earlier for those micro producers, the 200 plant limit. There are caps on each one of these for the integrated micro business. So same type of license, the person that holds the integrated cannabis micro business license will be able to conduct any of the following activities or one or more of these activities. So they would be able to be that producer, that micro business producer where they're capped at 200 mature plants. They can also grow only at a single premises. Same thing with manufacturing, that's making those cannabis products out of the cannabis that they produce. They can only do that at one single premises. They are also allowed to have one retail establishment location, and they can sell and transport the products that they make through their manufacturing license as an integrated micro business. And then they're also able to be a courier to deliver these products to the consumer. While my team was actually looking through the rules and the regulations and everything, the requirements for this license, we ran across a few things that flagged our attention, and we just wanted to make sure that everyone watching this is also aware of these. A few of those details are actually that the medical licensees that are going to be also applying for adult use licenses are allowed to use the existing premises that they are currently operating in as a medical licensee. Now, what does that mean for people who are just now getting into cannabis, just want to get into the recreational side of things? That means that these medical licensee holders are a few steps ahead. They already have one of the bigger pieces for applying for a cannabis business license, the location taken care of. We'll get a little bit more into why location is super important a little bit later on, but just wanted people to be aware that medical licensees can use the same premises. Another thing that we've mentioned briefly and touched on when we were talking about the producer licenses is that this is an issue that we haven't seen before, actually. Myself, I have not personally, but there is an annual fee for producers specifically, that's that cultivator license, an annual fee for the licensing. That's what you would pay to get your license renewed and or just get the license in general. But there are also annual plant fees. So that is going to be a fee per plant that they will actually have to pay at the same time as they're getting their annual license renewal. So that is something a little bit different that we actually haven't seen in other states before, and just good for producers to know whenever they're getting ready to pay those fees at the beginning of the year.
All right. And some other things we just wanted to chat about. I guess I mentioned it before, but do want to bring up again that local jurisdictions can put that cap on social consumption areas. And depending on where they set that cap, it's really going to determine how competitive of a process it may be to obtain one of those licenses. So you can see a place like Santa Fe, if they pick 5 versus 20 versus 100 available social consumption licenses, the competition is going to be very different. Competition for those licenses, competition for properties, all that kind of thing. It's likely that pretty much everybody probably is going to set some kind of cap, some level of limitation on probably every type of license. And jumping ahead to just answer one question from Neri, that they are going to be able to set limits on distances from schools and daycares, but no more than 300 feet. Well, think about it, in a way that's good. So, they can't say 300 feet's the most extreme they can be. They can't do in Arkansas and say literally it was within 2,500 square feet of a church. And if you've ever been to Arkansas, I realize that is not much land. That is more than 2,500 feet from a church. So, they can also set restrictions around time that it's taking place, and of course, always in zoning. But again, they're not going to be able to completely restrict. Now, the other thing, we've never seen this before, it's so interesting, that if an applicant provides documentation of an agreement to accept cannabis and cannabis products on consignment from those two kinds of micro businesses, they can get this discount. Now, if that's something you're interested in, I recommend you bring it up early with your bookkeeping and accounting staff, and also think about all the software you're using and making sure that it can support something like that, especially your point of sale system. You would want to be able to track what's consignment and what's not really well to make sure that people are getting those, their money back on those consignments, and also that you don't lose that discount. Another really interesting thing that they're doing here in New Mexico that I really like is that those micro businesses and social equity businesses, we don't have the exact definition. I could read you a long legal thing about disproportionately impacted areas and stuff. But basically, those two groups, those micro businesses and those social equity licensees, are going to be able to get a certification from the state and put some kind of logo or brand or seal kind of thing on their products, so that the consumer can see easily if they want to choose to spend their money with smaller producers, social equity producers. They're making it very easy to do so. That's great. It doesn't exist here in Colorado. I got to do the research if I want to, for example, purchase a BIPOC-owned cartridge, that kind of thing. So great to see them making that progress. So, not to get too much in the unique and fun stuff, want to keep this focused and quick, make sure we get you guys in and out of here. But a crucial thing to do is talk about how to get ahead, if you're interested today in getting started, how you do so. Now, if this is a topic that interests you, we did a whole hour-long webinar just on this, not New Mexico specific, back in March. It's available on our website, thinkcanada.com, or on our YouTube. And Victoria was one of those, one of the presenters of that. But let's still touch on some stuff. So the first thing is read the actual law, House Bill 2, and the proposed rules that have come out so far. Those rules have details that are not set in stone, but if there's stuff you don't like, the hearing this Tuesday is to tell them that. So tell them that. They want to hear from you. There's 90-something comments on the website already. You can put it in there. You can attend the hearing. You can do both, but don't say the same thing because that will annoy folks. But yeah, start going through that stuff and use it to start planning out that required information for your license type. Thinking about the sort of stuff that you are going to need. The sort of stuff that you more want to do, the things you thought you want to do, but you realize you don't really when you read the details about it, right? And use that information to go towards starting to work in spreadsheets and thinking about how much money you're going to need for lots of various stuff in here. So for example, you're going to want to think about how much the building is going to cost, right? How much it's going to cost to fix and improve it, the price for things like security equipment, right? Then you're going to want to, for each of these little categories, as you're thinking about stuff, to plan a contingency amount of money too, with just the assumption that you haven't thought of everything, right? Once you've gone through every category and come up with numbers and come up with contingencies for everything, then you want to think about your minimum cash position. This is basically on the absolute worst day of the business. So if you're a dispensary and you've purchased all your product, you're paying your payroll, you've opened your doors, but nobody's bought a single thing yet, how much money is in your bank account? That's your minimum cash position. Now, we like to see that be a pretty healthy number because we don't want to see folks get into a cash crunch and be subject to some predatory lending or equity takeovers from VC money or something like that. So an example of what you may need that extra minimum cash position for is we have clients and others who wanted to apply for an adult use license in Illinois that required a property. So they would have purchased or agreed to lease that property in late 2019. Those licenses have yet to be awarded. So those folks are still paying their rents or their mortgages on that piece of property that they can't use for business yet, and don't want to sell because they don't know if they're going to get a license for business there yet, right? So having the money to plan for those crazy rainy days is really helpful. Now, once you've come up with that total number, including all the contingencies, minimum cash position and everything, you got to think, how much of my own money do I want this to be? And how much do I want or need to raise that from others? Now, that process of raising money, there's lots of money out there. Unlike the next two things we're going to talk about, it's not nearly as finite. Which is the good thing, right? The bad thing is that you got to go find it. So we recommend starting with friends and family, even if they don't have the income. It's a great way to practice your pitch, answer some questions in that mode, and also just to get the word out there, right? That you're interested in opening this business, let them talk to, their friends and family, and just keep spreading that. Now, the sort of next thing to do, and these are a bit, you need the money to buy the property, but some investors want to see the property, right? So next isn't always the perfect word, but anyway, property is finite. And the best properties are even more finite, right? So they need to qualify for everything under the act, such as, the distance not being too close, being, a space that's large enough for what we want to accomplish. But even if a space works, we need to make sure that it's going to work under the zoning of that city. So you're going to need to work with the zoning authority. If there is no, clear answer, you may need to get a special use permit. Be figuring that stuff out now, and the sooner you are, the less chance you're going to get into a difficult situation when you're tight on time later this year or early next year, depending on what license you're applying for. Another finite resource is qualified people. Cannabis businesses most often fail because they have an inadequate team and they're not filling all the necessary gaps. And even if you do fill the gaps, if you're one of those rare folks who has legal cannabis experience in the business type you want to go into, has great business experience, has great community connections, you might not want to be working 80 hours a week doing all that. So figuring out what you want to do, what you don't want to do, and then hiring folks for that is stuff to really get going on, as soon as you can, because the best folks are going to get, sort of locked up over time. And it's a fun process to build that team and can solve a lot of problems too as you go through that. So I do want to make sure that we're leaving plenty of time for questions, so stick them in the Q&A if you're interested. We'll give you a couple of minutes to do so. And while we go through that, Victoria, why don't you tell folks how to get in touch with us?
Of course. So here at Can Advisors, we actually offer quite a few resources for people, and just wanted to briefly run through those with you guys. So first of all, feel free to reach out, give us a call. Our biz dev team is waiting. They are bright people and they're there to answer your questions. Even if those are just preliminary questions to figure out exactly what that path would look like, give us a call. After that, biz dev could definitely pass you over to us, to the client services team. We could get started on business planning materials, because we all know it is never too early to get started planning these businesses. So we could get started with things such as financial modeling, business planning, even pitch decks to help raise that money for these endeavors for you. If you're already past that point, you're like, hey, I've already planned this out. I know exactly what I want to do. I just need help applying for the license. Give us a call for that as well. We also do license pursuit and are happy to help walk you through this competitive licensing process. Another thing that we offer for free is check out our blogs, our previous webinars. As Greg was mentioning, we have one we recorded back in March. It's actually a general getting started in a new cannabis state sort of webinar. So I definitely recommend to check those things out. There are links all over all of our social media channels. We have a YouTube channel dedicated specifically for these things. And you can always check out thinkcanna.com to take a look at those blogs. They are very informational and we're here to help. And the final piece is if you're not quite ready to commit, we offer hourly consultations. We are here to talk you off that ledge, talk you through any of those questions you may have, any of the concerns that you may have about any state, including New Mexico, to get started on your journey in cannabis. All right, and we'll open up the floor to some questions here. Let's see. Georgina says, I'm in New York and I missed the New York webinar. Is there a way that I can get that info sent to my email, please? Actually, Georgina, they are available on our website and they are actually available on all of our social media channels. So you can look on our LinkedIn and our Facebook. And I believe even there's a link on our Instagram as well. And then Neri says, the last part on more info is on YouTube is right, funding and zoning. We agree. You definitely need to have the funding and make sure that you are purchasing a property that is correct for zoning to save you from lots of headaches in the future.
Yep, and Neri, if you go onto the YouTube and just type in Canna Advisors, we should come up, and it was in the first week of March, I believe, Victoria, first or second week of March. Yep.
Early March.
All right. An anonymous attendee is asking if we can help existing licensed businesses in accessing financing. Well, we certainly can help out in that we can prepare you for the best possible pitch to financing and help connect you to those companies to get you ready for it. We aren't somebody who is going out and finding funding for you, but we have a ton of connections in the industry, know the kind of folks who do, and can give you a lot of strategies on sort of the best kind of financing you may want for your particular situation. So if you're an existing licensee in the state and you're planning to expand, we know of a couple groups that do sort of just that type of expansion financing for existing cannabis businesses. And there's lots of other options out there beyond the companies that just sort of lock in that on repetition. So anonymous attendee, certainly, get in contact with our business development department if you'd like to continue that conversation.
All right, and it looks like we have another anonymous. I live on the border of Texas. Is it a good idea to open a cannabis business in my area? Well, Greg, since you being the New Mexico native, I'll let you give this answer.
That's a great question. So, I will note that, of course, it is illegal to cross state lines with cannabis, period. Even if you're going from legal state to legal state. But obviously, border towns get a lot of cross-border activity. Trinidad, Colorado is a town of less than 20,000 people, but it has over a dozen dispensaries that are doing very well. Why? Because New Mexicans are driving up there. Texans are driving up there. Arizonans are driving up there for now. Maybe some folks in Utah are coming over, right? A lot of those places are probably going to go out of business next year. Or have to pivot and find new ways of attracting customers, right? As businesses open up in Raton, Santa Fe, Albuquerque, it's going to be less attractive. So for the last, since what, for the last 8 years, is that right, Victoria?
2007.
Oh, I'm talking about adult use in Colorado.
Oh, 2014. Yes, 8 years. Sorry,
yeah.
math. Had to do math.
It's been fabulous to have one of those businesses in Trinidad, right? That has been 8 very lucrative years. That's probably going to change right now. So there is that short-term advantage, but the story doesn't end there. Portland, Oregon is on the border with Washington, and they've both had legal cannabis for years. Yet, in some dispensaries in Oregon, the majority of driver's licenses they see are from Washington. It's because there's less supply and higher taxes in Washington, which leads to much higher prices. And it's worth it to many consumers to cross that border and obtain Oregon cannabis for that price point and that quality point consideration. You may well see that continue after legalization in the long term in border towns. Another thing to keep in mind is that cannabis dispensaries are very sticky, in that the first dispensary that a consumer goes to, they tend to continue going to that business even when other businesses open up that are closer and or businesses open up that have better prices. Now, there are marketing strategies to unstick customers from that, but some people, even when great dispensaries open up in Raton, are just going to keep driving up to Trinidad because they know the folks, because they trust the folks, because they always like the product up there. Now, people were thinking that there was going to be a lot of Colorado cross-border traffic into Raton because at the time of the law's passage earlier this year, the maximum an adult use consumer could purchase in Colorado was 1 ounce, and in New Mexico it was 2 ounces. But they figured that out here in Colorado pretty quick and just passed the 2 ounce rule. So having that Texas border town, Texas just expanded their medical program to allow a whole 1% of THC instead of 0.3% THC. So I would think it's likely going to be lucrative for a good period of time. And even in the long term, you could see them passing an extremely restrictive program once they do. Now, it looks like we got one last question in here, and after that, we better call it a day. For other questions that have come in, we'll email folks answers to your individual ones. And if you think of anything else, just go on our website and we'll see how we can help you out. So the last question here is from Neri, and around how much is it for Can Advisors to help out to build a business? We have a really customized approach to that. So depending on what you're interested in doing, our fees are pretty wide ranging. Some folks just want to have strategic sessions with us, have us review materials they work on themselves. Other folks really want us to educate them about the industry and use financial models, pitch decks, and business plans to do that and to really prepare them for the best possible thing. So call up our business development department, send them a website inquiry. They're always free to talk to and give you some of those specific prices. But yeah, it's nice that we do have a customized approach for getting the price right for you. It could be a little frustrating when you're just trying to get prices because we're not one of those cookie cutter places. So with that, I think we better wrap it up for the day. Let people enjoy the rest of their Wednesdays.